Hi everyone, my name is Maitreyi Bharath. I'm a senior at Lee High School in California, and this is my research project on the influence of music, short-term memory, and neurodivergence on reading comprehension. Let's get started. So, as a brief overview of what I'll go over today, we're going to have an introduction to why I chose this topic of music and cognition, my methodology for my experimental research studies that I did for this project, and finally, analysis of the results. What did the numbers say? Some key words before we get into the details. Working memory is a system that temporarily stores and processes information, and that's how we process a lot of our speech and can remember telephone numbers as we recite them, things like that. The phonological loop is actually the part of working memory that helps us process the information that we hear. The p-value is a number that signifies statistical significance and is the probability that results are caused by random error. And finally, the most important term, the normal distribution. This is the distribution or pattern that most systems follow in nature, and it looks like a symmetrical little bell curve around an average value. So this is an indication of a normal population in our universe. All right. All right, so let's get into our introduction. Why music and cognition? I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of the Mozart theory, where people say that classical music improves brain function and brain development, especially for young children. But this theory is actually not up to the hype. The paper itself that sprouted the Mozart theory was specific to a certain method of visualization and reasoning, and the effects were temporary. But this theory and its hype really got me interested in whether the genre of music makes a difference in our cognitive abilities, especially reading comprehension. So, some background, a little bit of previous research that has been done on this topic. Music therapy has been shown as generally helpful where people with mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, and OCD, and in many cases, these conditions are linked to our performance in educational environments, especially for reading ability. Background music has been shown to improve reading comprehension performance for ADHD students while impairing neurotypical students as well. And lower working memory capacity correlates to lower reading comprehension ability, where music can actually overload your working memory capacity and thereby impact reading comprehension. A few more effects. Music in general has very diverse effects on cognition. According to previous research, there's negative effects, there's positive effects where music improves your mood, and just other relevant findings that link other concepts like working memory and neurodivergence to the relationship between music and reading. All right. So this led me to my research question, which was how do different genres of music affect reading comprehension and working memory? A lot of previous research focuses on aspects like volume, tempo, rhythmic style, but most studies don't really focus on a more colloquial form of separation between music types, which is genre. A lot of people listen to music on the daily when they're working or studying, and usually we identify our favorite genres by sharing whether we like pop or rock. However, this is not a characteristic that's frequently studied, and that's a gap that I wanted to close through this project. All right. So this was my hypothesis. I tested 6 genres versus a control group with silence in the background. Pop, rock, rap, jazz, Western classical, and Indian classical. These genres were tested over 2 experimental studies. There were 3 parts to my hypothesis. So one, that pop and rock would improve reading comprehension due to their simple rhythms and harmonies, and therefore their inability to overload working memory capacity as much as they improve your mood while doing a reading task. Western classical, Indian classical, rap, and jazz would impair reading comprehension compared to a control silence group due to more complexity in rhythms and harmonies and the lyrics in rap overloading your memory capacity as you're trying to work on a reading task. And finally, that music would impair neurotypical participants while improving neurodivergent participants' reading comprehension ability. All right, so now into the methods. For this research, I conducted 2 experimental studies. I had IRB approved studies for this research. Mainly, it was set up and then 2 main stages, a reading comprehension task and a working memory task. Really, this task measured short-term memory more than working memory, but in general, memory is the main focus of that task. The reading comprehension for this first study was done with instrumental music in the background of an assigned genre, where participants read an SAT passage and answered reading comprehension questions while listening to music. The second study had a slightly different format. While the memory task was the same and was used as a baseline for memory capacity, for short-term memory capacity, the reading comprehension task had two parts. One where each participant had a genre of music playing in the background, and a reading task where there was silence in the background, serving as internal controls. The second study also used vocal music instead of instrumental music to see if the presence of lyrics affected the results at all. And then the data collection and preparation, we had reading scores, memory scores, and then for a short analysis, adjusted scores where the reading score was divided by the memory score to see if reading was truly independent of short-term memory. And for the analysis, everything was done through Python-based statistical tests, mostly non-parametric tests where a lot of the distributions of data didn't follow that specific normal distribution, in which case you have to use these specific tests outlined on the slide. Kruskal, Wallace, and Mann-Whitney for comparing different groups or different genres between participants. The Shapiro-Wilk to check whether a distribution or group of participants is normal and follows that expected pattern of results. And then the Brown-Forsythe test, which tests whether within a group, how far apart from that average center value is each person, and whether that's equal across multiple groups. And finally, the results. So this paper actually contradicted a lot of my hypotheses. Background music did not significantly impact reading comprehension performance. The p-value, or the probability of these results coming up to random chance where there was a difference, was not high enough to render a significant difference between groups that had music in the background versus groups that had no music running in the background while their reading task was being performed. Different genres of music also did not significantly interact with reading comprehension ability. There were no differences between genres. And there was also no difference between vocal and instrumental music, which was unexpected since the presence of lyrics was, in previous research, indicated to overload your reading capacity and working memory capacity even more and prevent you from performing the task as well as you would with instrumental music. Differences in age group and familiarity with the task didn't seem to affect performance on the reading comprehension. And musical experience or familiarity with the music in general, just listening to music constantly, also did not have an impact on the reading comprehension abilities of participants. So one important result that came out of the paper was that background music does impact neurodivergent and neurotypical participants differently. So there were significant differences in silence scores, which was when participants in the second study had no background music playing as they completed a reading comprehension task, but those differences disappeared when background music was added to the task. And there were also no differences in that baseline memory capacity, indicating that all participants were about the same in short-term memory and there was no influences caused by memory capacity on reading ability. So that indicated that music slightly impaired reading comprehension performance for neurodivergent participants, since neurodivergent participants had a lower median than neurotypical participants on the original reading scores. And these differences may have been small, but they seem to have added up across the entire neurodivergent group as a whole, which made the overall performance with background music of neurodivergent participants similar to neurotypical performance when background music was added. So that offers a lot of potential for how background music can be used for future music therapy, and or whether it's even a good solution for neurodivergent people with conditions that may affect their educational ability. Another result that was interesting was that short-term memory and reading task performance, which are largely believed to be independent in literature, were not always independent across different genre groups in this study. For study one, which had instrumental music, jazz, pop, and Western classical, as well as the control group, actually did show a lack of independence between reading task performance and the memory capacity measured through memory scores. For study two, Indian classical, vocal music, and vocal pop music showed that dependent relationship between memory and reading. This offers a few more conclusions for what genres of music might affect people with certain memory capacities differently and how that can be used to influence listening habits in educational environments. All right, some factors to consider. Definitely in future studies, larger sample sizes. I did have a total of 89 participants across both studies, with about 4 to 5 per genre group in study one and about 10 in genre two, study two, excuse me. But of course, the more the better. You always want to have more participants for stronger statistical results. Also, this study didn't address preference-specific genres or familiarity with any of the music tested. The way the study was arranged was that participants were randomly assigned genres in the hopes of evening out any differences in preference for a specific genre. For example, if one participant liked opera and another person didn't, but they were both randomly assigned opera, any effects based on preference would be evened out because they were in the same group and treated as one whole set. Musical characteristics within genres is another aspect that I think would be really interesting to explore in the future. Typical speed, volume, rhythmic patterns frequent in one genre, such as jazz or pop, that may have affected how people process the music differently during a reading task. And also involving digit span backward tests for working memory. In this study, we used digit span forward tests, which are more an indication of short-term memory and attention span than working memory. Of course, this is still debatable and not exactly clear in current literature, so it could be used in an estimate for working memory. It's up in the air right now, which is why it would be useful to use both types of tests in one setting to indicate memory capacity more strongly, and also other working memory tests as applicable. And finally, familiarity with the reading comprehension tasks. For this study, as I was working in the high school level and working with high school students, I used the SAT and ACT practice passages from online resources that I found. So in general, middle school and high school students, middle schoolers who are very advanced in their preparation, that is, would be more familiar with this sort of reading task format and the sort of layout of such studies. And so controlling for that by potentially developing new reading passages and new questions in a different format that's unfamiliar to all participants would be potentially useful for better assessing reading ability and how music, short-term memory, and neurodivergence impact that relationship. And finally, the application of research. So this study is especially informative for people who typically listen to music while working or studying. There's a lot of different effects that music can have on our cognitive ability, and some of the insights on specific genres and how they impact our cognition can help influence our listening habits in the future and what we do when we're trying to be more productive. And potentially, some of the music genres or results of the study could be used to increase learning attainment in subjects that require extensive reading and analysis. For example, the whole result of how neurodivergent participants and neurotypical participants are impacted differently by different genres of music could be used as a basis for changing educational environments for neurodivergent students and helping them achieve better learning attainment. For acknowledgements, I'd really like to thank my parents for supporting me throughout this and making these studies possible. My mentors, Chiaki Santiago and Elsie, who is not fully named per their wishes, from UCSD throughout this project. The Lee High School IRB committee that gave me the approval to go ahead and work with real people on an actually ethical basis. Brandon Wall, Samantha Nguyen, Kara Butler, and Deborah Phelan. And finally, all the participants who took part in this study and really made this research possible. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope that I can answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Maitreyi. Okay, well, I just have one quick question for time. That was a very well-designed and very complex experiment. So I'm curious to know, what was the most difficult hurdle that you kind of had to work through in approaching your experiment?
Yeah, so it was actually recruitment. So a lot of what I did to get participants was mainly word of mouth recruitment. I advertised the study throughout like my school. I emailed as many people as I knew. I texted as many people as I knew about the study. A lot of it was just getting people to both sign up and then also show up on the day. So that was honestly the biggest hurdle because as you know, for statistically significant results, you need to have a large enough sample size to make your study's results valid. That was actually one of the reasons why I conducted a second study. The first study was just shy of, it was a little too close to the border, statistically significant than I wanted. So I conducted a second one with a much larger data set of 60 people to make sure that my results were strong.